Alright, let's get out some graph paper to graph these fishies. We have a sunfish here, and this sunfish seems really happy. However, what he doesn't know is there is a largemouth bass who sees him, and bass love to eat sunfish. Now the neat thing about scatter plots is we can make a table, chart how many bass and how many sunfish are around, and we can make predictions based on what we observe. And this is where math comes in very useful. Alright, the first step to doing this is determine the independent and dependent variables and label their axes. And our independent is going to be our x. Our dependent is going to be our y. So in our example, the number of sunfish, our prey, is dependent on the number of bass, our predator. So the number of sunfish is going to go on the vertical y-axis, and the number of bass, our predator, is going to go on the x-axis, because the number of sunfish are dependent on the number of bass. So we're trying to measure how many sunfish there are. Alright, our next step is we're going to graph the ordered pairs to make a scatter plot. So graph the ordered pairs to make a scatter plot. Each axis needs to have even intervals, and the graph should be easy to read or easy to interpret. That means you want to take up most of the space you have in your graph. Alright, and our third step is sketch a straight trend line through the middle of the data and extend it to take up the whole graph. And we'll do that in just a minute. And about the same number of points should be below and above the line. And our last step is to make predictions. Write an equation in slope-intercept form. And this is crucial. You only read the line. A common mistake is to look at the points, so ignore the actual points. Alright, pause the video if you need to. That's going to do it for our 4 steps, and now we're going to implement that into our example, and we'll see if this little sunfish can survive the wrath of the bass. Whoosh. Alright, for our example with our bass and our sunfish, this is in a pond. We just observed the data over several years, and we recorded it. So in 2006, let's say there were about 225 sunfish and 12 bass. You could record this data with me. 2007, we have 233 sunfish and 9 bass. 2008, we recorded 165 sunfish and 18 bass. 2009, we have 141 sunfish and 20 bass. 2010, we have 152 sunfish and 19 bass. 2011, 134 sunfish and 23 bass. 2012, we have 156 sunfish and 22 bass. And the last year we're going to record is 2013. We have 130 sunfish and 20 bass. Alright, make sure you have that data down, and we're going to use our 4 steps to graph this data and make a prediction as to how many sunfish will be in the pond based on how many bass we observe. Alright, I'm going to skip back to the other slide for our first step. You can look at your notes. Our first step said that we need to label our independent and our dependent variables. So we said the sunfish is our dependent, so that's our y. So I'm just going to label my sunfish as my y, and the number of bass is my x, because that's my independent variable. So the number of sunfish is dependent on the number of bass. Alright, second step. We're going to graph this data, so on your graph paper we need to go up at least 10 spaces and right at least 12 spaces. So prepare for that when you draw your axes, and you can do that with me now. Alright, I made a title, Fish in a Pond. My y-axis is the number of sunfish. My x-axis I labeled is the number of bass. And remember, your note said that you should go by even intervals and your graph should be real easy to see or to interpret. Alright, so what's our biggest number for sunfish? 225, no, 233. So if I go by tens, 10, 20, 30, boy, I'm not going to get there. What if I go by 25s? Yeah, that should work better. So I could say 25, 50. I'm going to label every hash mark. I'm actually going to label every other hash mark. So each one represents 25. So 25, 50, 75, I'm going to label my 100. And you can do this with me. 125, I'm going to label the next one 150. 175, the next one is 200. And then 225, the next one is 250. And that should be good because my data only goes up to 233. Alright, now looking at the x-axis, my number of bass, my biggest number in any given year was 2011. That was 23 bass. So if I count by ones, that's going to take up way too many spots, I think. So why don't we go by twos? So the first one's 2, the next one would be 4, the next hash mark 6, the next one we'll label 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, and notice I'm using the existing hash marks on my graph. 18 and then 20, 22 and then 24. And the reason I'm not labeling every one is just to make it neat so it's easy to read. If you're writing small, I'm sure you can do that though. You can fill in every one if you want. Alright, let's start charting them. So 2006 we had, and I'm ignoring the years, I'm just looking at the first year to help me graph. I have 12 bass, so that means I'm going to go, so when I have 12 bass, I have 225 sunfish. So that's going to be right about there where those two meet up. So that's where I'm going to put my dot. So 225 is halfway between 200 and 250, and that's where the 12 bass is. So that one ordered pair represents those two. Alright, so look at the next year, 9 bass. So that means if I go over here in between, that's 8 and 10, those two hash marks, so right in between there's 9. And then 233 is just above the 225, so right about there. So I'm going to put a point to represent that spot. And that's right about there would be a good spot, I think. Because it's halfway between 8 and 9, and then it's just above that 225 spot. Alright, graph the next one with me. 18 bass. So 18's halfway between 16 and 20, so that hash mark. And then 165, that would be 175, so that's lower than the 175, so somewhere there is where they match up. I'm going to put a dot there to represent that. So 18 and 165, about right there. Okay, my next spot, 20 bass is 141. So 20, and it's going to be just below that 150. About right there. You should be getting the hang of it now. So 19 bass in 2010. So that's in between. That's not going to be exactly on a hash mark. It's in between the 18 and the 18 and the 20, and that's 152. So 19 is going to be 152. That's like right about there. Is that point? 23 is 134. So that's in between 22 and 24, and it's above my 125. So somewhere around there. 22 and 156. So 22's here, 156 is just above my 150 mark. Right about there. And then my last point is 20 bass and 130 sunfish. So right above that 125. Alright, that's what mine looks like. Hopefully yours looks very similar. Alright, now our third step says sketch a straight trend line through the middle of our data. So this takes some practice, and we'll practice with this in class. But that line should go right through the center of that data. So this is slanted downhill. It's got a negative slope. And that's where I'm going to put that line. So I have a few points that are above it. You can see some of those points above it, and then some points are below the line. That should always be the case. So you should always use a ruler to do that, or something straight. So go ahead and draw that line through your data. And notice I'm making sure it crosses the y-axis. Why do you think I want to cross the y-axis? Yeah, because I want to get my y-intercept for my fourth step. I want to be able to write the equation. So I need that y-intercept, which is right here, wherever it crosses, right there. Alright, so let's do that fourth step now together. So our y-intercept, and I might need to label a few more things here, because if you'll notice, it goes above 250, so that would be 275. This is 300. And then that next mark is at 325. So it looks like it's just below 325. Maybe 315 would be a good example of where that point is. So I'm going to label that point as 0, 315 would be that ordered pair. And I'm guessing here. It's an educated guess, but it looks like it's about 315. Hopefully it's similar on your graph. And that's my y-intercept. Now if you'll recall, to get the slope, all I need is any two ordered pairs. I can do rise and run. And your notes told you ignore those points. Don't be looking at these exact points. Those will throw you off. You only care about points that are on the line. You may say, well, I don't see any points on the line. Okay? Or maybe this is the only point on the line. Well, that's okay. You can make up points that are on the line. So, for instance, it looks to me like right there could represent the point. If I go straight down, that would represent the point 14 across. So 14 could be my x value. And then if I go straight across, it looks like that point could represent 200 for my y. So when you're making these points up, again, they have to be on the line. And you can pick up any two that you want. I'm always going to pick ones that are a little far apart. So I'm using my y-intercept and that point that I just pointed out. Get it? 14, 200. So how much do I rise and how much do I run? Well, you could just think, how do you get from 200 to 315? That's my y value. My y and my x. You just go up 115, right? So if I were just to write rise over run, I can just say, okay, I'm going to rise 115 to get there. And then how much do you run? Well, I'm going to the left 14. So I'm going here 14, so that would be 14. And we know since it's going downhill, it's a negative slope. So I could call my slope as negative 115 over 14. I know it's not pretty, but that definitely works for your slope. Alright, so we know our y-intercept is 315 because that's where it crossed over here, where it crossed the y-axis. So since I know these two things, we're on step 4, I can write the equation. So it would be y equals mx plus b, and I'm just plugging in for my m. I had negative 115 over 14. Bring down my x. Your slope always has the x next to it, that's your rate. And my y-intercept is 315, so plus 315. And now you can make predictions. Let's say we want to make a prediction for, and this will be our last question, if we want to find out if there were 30 bass, how many sunfish would there be? Alright, I'll give you a second to jot down that question. And now I want you to read the graph. So read your line. Read the line. And look where you would have 30 bass. So we have 26, 28. That's going to represent 30 right there. So when there's 30 bass, go up to your line and read where that 30 would be. That would be right there on the line. And then you look straight across to where that would be on the y-axis. And it looks like it would be right around 75 over here. So that's where those two match up. So I would say about 75 sunfish. And you may have a slightly different answer than me because our line of best fits may be a little different, but this gives you a pretty good approximation. Alright, thanks for watching.